Well, good afternoon, Maskati, Masquerade, Sanibonani. My name is Piwai, or some people know me as Laina. And I have the pleasure of doing the, fourth iteration of this thing I call profiles. I didn't have a name for it before, but now it has a name. It's called profiles because I spend my time watching people. I didn't realize I watch people. So I have a friend, a famous friend. Well, in my head, she's famous. Her name is No Violet Beloya. She's a writer. She wrote the book We Need New Names, and her last book is called Glory. And she just told me she's writing another book. It's gonna be out soon. But I know she spends her time watching people. She watches people, and I think it's really important to watch what goes on around you because then you're more in touch. And when you get connected to people and you find them interesting and they're doing something, it's always important to, showcase them because sometimes some people are not tooting their own horns even though they have amazing works in the process, or they may have, we just don't know where to find it, right? So profile is really about introducing change makers who are putting a positive spin on the African narrative. And we have to tell our stories, whether it's someone else who's not inherently African that looks like us, it doesn't really matter. It's about putting that spin and the work that goes there. And sometimes it's about seeing where you're from through someone else, right? Say, for instance, one thing that really drew me, that sparked my interest in Philip's work is the bottle store collection. I can't tell you how many times I've gone through that. It's just so amazing. There's so much detail in there. Whatever his angle of taking those pictures, whatever the reason that he was using, I don't know. But for me, I was seeing a lot of things. I'm looking at the faces of the people, their fashions at the time. Sometimes it could be just the buildings, and some of those buildings are still around, some of them are not, some of them are, whatever perspective, everybody has their perspective. And I think, like they say, pictures worth 1,000 words. So there's so much you can abstract from just a photo alone. But for me, it wasn't just his photography. So Philip is, I'm being long-winded now. He's an amazing also sculptor. He does photography, a fine art photographer, and some very interesting futuristic perspective on art itself. So we've been talking for the last probably 6-7 months or so, just trying to put this together, I feel like he just got tired of me. I was like, yes, let's do it. But anyway, drawing upon his rich heritage and a lifelong fascination with experimental techniques, Philip Chudy concludes the role of the artist is as midwife rather than creator. He interrogates diverse cultural influences he has encountered and challenges the popular modern views of what fine art is. And that its primary purpose is to serve his personal and social needs. So without further ado, I'm going to just lay out introduce Philip. We're going to do a quick Q&A session, just me and him, and then we'll let him take over. And then afterwards, you guys can ask questions, or I think he's fine with asking questions during the time that he's talking. And then, I already told you guys, there's food upstairs, and for some of you who order food, I will bring your food down so you don't have to come up. Okay? So without further ado, Philip Chudy.
Thank you.
Okay, Philip, so what inspires the forms and material you use in your sculptures? Particularly when I say sculptures, I know we don't have a specific sculpture here today, because we don't have that work. We have the photography that everybody else can see. But I'm talking particularly, we've talked at length about this particular one on the screen. So
yeah, this is a work in progress and has been for many, many years. It started out really as a piece of philosophical modeling. It was meant to be following an idea to do with enlightenment. That was looking at Buddhism and looking at Hinduism and many of these religions, which was So it started out really, I think, when I think as a teenager, the main thing that came to me was the thought behind the thought. So this was an idea that if you live life as an animal, you just live in the moment. If you live as an intellectual, you think you live on a level above what is actually happening. And then I thought that it made sense that if you were a higher being, then you live on a couple of thoughts behind what you're doing. And, well, you know, the higher the being you are, the more thoughts you are behind everything, the higher level of analysis. And then I kept thinking about many of these, you know, it was fashionable when I was younger, Eastern religions, the idea of meditation and achieving enlightenment, that seemed to be an ambition. But it struck me as if there are a couple of ways of going about this. You had the idea that you sat and meditated for 50 years somewhere and you built up more and more understanding of things, and eventually one day you got to this wonderful experience where you understood everything. I mean, that's the way it was described. I was thinking, well, if you think about thoughts behind the thought, you think about something and the next thought that you have about it is more complicated, it's more involved, and then one beyond that becomes even more involved, and eventually when you achieve enlightenment, probably what is happening is that you have awakened every thought that is potential in your brain. Every brain cell is lit up and you have this wonderful feeling of infinity. But then I thought about it, well, you know, how many brain cells have you got? And what experience have you had? It's limited. So then I thought, well, okay, this is a limited infinity. So I drew a graph which, you know, should go up to infinity if it's by the square. But this one here doesn't quite get to infinity because you're limited. And this sculpture here that's on the screen, if you take one of those corners on there and you follow the shape of it, it gets bigger and bigger, but it doesn't really reach infinity. It kind of goes back on itself. There was this big thing in the 60s, 70s, which was at the end of all your searching in life, you return to the place where you started and you know it for the first time. And well, that was the inspiration behind this sculpture. I thought, okay, so you start out, you get very big, you then achieve. Well, the other statement that was behind this was the Zen thing, which said, before enlightenment, there's cleaning the toilet and washing the dishes. And after enlightenment, there's cleaning the toilet and washing the dishes. So there was this suggestion that really whatever you expand into, what your understanding, eventually you come back in a way, you reconnect with things. And so then I thought about a bunch of other things which were popular at the time, which was that, you know, in Hindu, I don't know if you should call it religion, but they, you know, many of these yogis, they say you can achieve enlightenment even by sinning. You can be a bad person, but you know, somehow you can still understand the world eventually. And there seemed to be an idea that and with people with spiritual searches, that from another point of view they looked, you know, evil, or you know, you didn't appreciate, you know, we're the right guys, we doing things this way, and we're going to achieve stuff. And when you look at the way the other people are going about it, they are bad. And so I thought, well, when you look at things from certain points of view, you intercept what's going on in another thought process, it seems to you to be completely different from what you expect. So on the sculpture anyway, this is probably too detailed, but looking at this, if you follow all these outer edges on the sculpture, you reach another point where you meet another plane. And if you're thinking that there's another thought process going on that plane, one of them is breaking it all down to nothing, a very simple thing, and the other one is building it up to something very complicated. And so people's assessment of each other, or your own assessment of different thought processes, meant that anyway, at the end of the day, this is rubbish because it's not really a scientific graph. It really is a kind of a thought aid. It's something which can help you to think that, yes, if I look at things from a different point of view, then maybe the other stuff, it just doesn't seem to fit. But anyway, the end of this whole thing is that at various points where all these areas meet, there's a connection between opposites. And so I had, right, and this is getting to the end of this, right, I thought there are many things you could put on the various nodes on the sculpture, but originally I thought of things like action and meditation, opposites, or you could say good and bad, or you could say transcendence and versus solidity. And once you start using that as a thought aid, then there's a sense about how these things interrelate. So, yeah, I mean, this is a lifelong obsession trying to make something or other of what this represents. But at the end of the day, it's really, like a regular yin-yang symbol. It talks about two opposites in harmony, and that's meant to give you a feeling that there's a harmonious opposite on everything in life. And it's good. It's also not that good because lots of opposites are not really opposite. So jumping in the air is not the opposite of gravity. So the two things which are seemingly opposite are not. It's not healthy to think about everything as being a harmonious thing of opposites because. Yeah, anyway, it's a simplified way of thinking. But that's as far as it goes on that sculpture.
Well, that's good. Well, the reason why I asked, because I think when you first showed it to me, you also told me that I think it happened somewhere right when you were very young, and I think this was after your father had died. And the reason I'm bringing this up because your father was also a renowned sculptor or an artist himself, and for those who don't know, he has a lot of work that was commissioned by the former president, especially some works you can see them at the National Gallery in Zimbabwe. So our discussions, have always been involved in this, also sparked my curiosity. So that said, for me, I know a thought behind a thought, rubbish or not, right? How does for me, I'm extrapolating from I'm trying to not be too scientific about it, but when I look at it, there's also shadows in the sculpture, right? There's shadows. And so to me, because of the medium that I work in, I always think that we always forget about one interesting component about ourselves is our DNA, because that never runs away from us. And I know you had, say, for instance, you were not with your father for a long time. He passed away when you were pretty young. But I feel like when I look at your work and his work, there's this parallel, both photography and sculpture, there's a parallel connection between your work. And so to me, that's why this sculpture is important, because it might be a thought in a thought or rubbish, whatever it is, but there's this heritage piece. So my initial question was, how does your Zimbabwean heritage, and I said, no, you're not going to like that. How does your heritage, whether it's the Zimbabwean side or the Polish side of you, which we've discussed that, sometimes you're like, I don't really care for that, or you don't really have a strong connection with, how does it influence your sculpture work, one, and how does it influence your photography?
Well, the first thing that happened when you were relating to my father, first thing that happened was that he was, for his generation, he was a scientist and an artist, and in those days most people said you can't really be one or the other. The two things are separate. He did research into bats and echolocation built electronic devices and was going to research dolphin speech. The idea that those two things are connected was not really unique to him, but it was a coming thing. There were lots of people of his generation, or the progressive people, who started to think in terms of the merging of science and art. So that's the first thing that influenced me. I mean, to be able to think about this stuff. This kind of thing was partially from that, and it was also partially because, well, I mean, I have a direct connection. My parents were interested in Eastern religions, African religions, Jung. There are lots of things that were fashionable at that time, so that influenced things. But the biggest thing was that Zimbabwe and Africa was a place apart from European tradition. I mean, he came from a Europe where so many things were institutionalized. Universities, culture, all of this had been laid down, and really most people artists working at that time, you had to rebel against the system in order to do something new. Whereas when you started from Zimbabwe, there was no opposition to you. There wasn't apart from the white cultural thing, which really wasn't really trying to define you in terms of art. It was telling you that you should play cricket, and you should have barbecues instead of going to galleries, and you shouldn't be an intellectual, you should play polo. But there was a very clear space. If you wanted to create something, you were free to do anything that you wanted. And the same thing applied also to the so-called Shona sculpture. People came along with no particular tradition of sculptural forms, and they just did what came into their mind. It was a very pure scenario. There wasn't this opposition. There wasn't this sense of being oppressed by long European traditions. So that was definitely one of the things that struck me. I mean, so you have a little bit of that mirroring the experience of quite a lot of people who came to the US. They came here, and there was nothing much really pushing them one way or the other. They, everything they did was new to them. I mean, you have a big lift when you have a cultural tradition behind you. You have intellectual traditions. You stand on the shoulders of the people who came before you.
Right.
And if you try and reinvent everything from the start, you're almost going back to the beginning and give yourself a disadvantage. But that definitely interested me. Plus, the other thing was, when it came to photography, with the bush stores, yes, many of my bush stores were in the style of American photography. There were quite a few people who had been taking pictures like that of bush stores in the USA, but there was mostly, in terms of photography, this was photographing things that other people hadn't seen before. I mean, when I went to Gokwe, I'd never met anybody who'd been to Gokwe. So
I've never been to Gokwe.
I was coming back with pictures of this place. Whereas when you went to Europe and you want to take a picture of the Eiffel Tower, you're competing with thousands and thousands of other people. They've taken the pictures, and you want to do something original, so you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. You're going to have, you're really straining very hard to do something original. And there isn't much joy in saying, oh, here's a picture of the Eiffel Tower, folks. Yes, I've seen 10,000 photos of it already, but my picture of Gokwe was nobody else has got a
Right.
picture of Gokwe. So it's there's a kind of simplicity to the whole thing. There's a kind of innocence to it, and yeah, there's a really common feeling in terms of everybody in Zimbabwe is taking the first pictures of everything when it came to photography, because photography hadn't been around for a long time. So yeah, it was all new. Now, as it turns out, there are very few people who documented social life in those periods, and so this stuff is interesting. Well, there are very few photographers in the country, and most of them, their collections were thrown away because nobody valued them. And so now this becomes, it's not really art it's not the artistic ambition anymore. This is stuff that is interesting as a historical piece. You can conflate art and history, of course, but you're not going to refuse that something's interesting, whatever the reason that somebody's interested
The
in
intent behind it.
it.
The intent behind it.
Well, yeah, that's why I was talking about the entire thing of intent as art. If one's going to go away from all of that and just come back to basics, well, photography is such a useful thing for relating to art, because in a way it's when you do something or other, which is painting or sculpture, it's obviously art. I mean, what else are you doing it for? You're doing something for some kind of pleasure in the medium. When it comes to photography, there are plenty of uses of photography which are nothing to do with art. So you really, when it comes to photography, the intent becomes quite important. You can have a robot which is wandering around the streets, timed to take pictures every 10 seconds. If you took 50,000 photos of those and edited them and say, oh, here are 200 of them, they're really interesting, that's just by chance. And then I'm a great editor and I'll make an exhibition and everybody will say, wow, great photographer. But it wasn't a photographer, it was just chance photos. The big difficulty in photography, when you can't try and talk about it as an art, is to say well, what did the photographer do? It's always the accusation was, yeah, I could have taken that, or my kid could have taken that, or, you had to be there at the right moment, so big deal. So somebody's trying to say to you, yeah, but he had the eye, this person really saw it in a different way. Well, how do you know? I mean, right. It could be a chance. So in terms of photography as an art, you really have to look at it from the point of view of the life of a photographer. I mean, when you have many pictures chosen by somebody, you can start to see what did they mean to take, what interested them, what is unique about them. But at the same time, there's a contradiction. You're taking pictures of something. I mean, to revert back to one of the things that I noticed when I first went to Europe. So there I was, a photographer who had gone to Gokwe and taken pictures of Gokwe, and nobody had been there, and this obviously was interesting. Arriving in Europe, where go to a photographic college where people don't have much money. What are you going to go and photograph? The teachers used to say, well, for your first free project, we don't want any pictures of graveyards, because every student was going to say, well, what can I go and photograph? What's interesting out here? It's a boring town. Everything's boring. Where can I get some emotion? I'll go to a graveyard. It's up the road. Everybody waits. So with photography, you're very dependent on having something interesting to photograph. And if there's nothing interesting there, how are you going to take interesting photos? But, this is where the European idea was oh, you develop style. So, if you're a genius photographer, to hell with anything interesting. You're going to go out on the piece of the sidewalk, you're going to find a blade of grass, or, maybe you could photograph dog shit, and you can find something artistic in dog shit, and you're going to photograph dog shit all your life, and you're going to become an expert in that. This is very much channeled into style, interpretation style, all of these kind of things, as opposed to going to Gokwe where nobody's been there, and you take a photo, and even if you took a bad photo of it, it's the only photo there is of Gokwe, and it's interesting. And then somebody can say to you, well, it's a very interesting photo of Gokwe. It's a very badly made photo, but we're still interested in it because nobody else has been there. So, it really gives the problem of intention. So when it comes down to this, so there's first of all there's the problem with photography about what interests you, what are we looking at, what did you do, and what actually I forgot to mention that the thing when I first went to Europe, it was a big fashion. If you were going to be an artistic photographer, you had to make something. But there was no argument anymore. If you go down to the beach and you found some beautiful shells and pieces of wood, and then you took them back and you glued them together and you made a little house out of them, and then you took some photos of them, nobody can say that you just took that picture by chance. You made everything in it. So the contrivance of it, I'm going out there and I'm getting people off the street and I'm going to dress them in 17th century costumes, and I'm going to have them on their cell phones, and I've had this idea. You can't accuse me of just taking a picture by luck. Or when I first went to London, the whole idea of photographers, well, we've got to build a set, we've got to employ the models, we've got people to build an Egyptian feast. It's all been made by us, so you have to give us the credit. But then, the intention is, in that particular case, when you start thinking about it, is give me a gold star, please, because I did this incredible feat, this fantastic production. And if, okay, but anyway, the idea of intention comes into it on all kinds of levels. It becomes a fashion. So you're an artist, and what is it that you're trying to achieve? And there'll be things on two levels. You're trying to do something for yourself personally, maybe, or you're trying to do something socially. You're trying to impress your friends, you're trying to make them happy, there are a whole range of things that can happen. Or you're trying to convince yourself that you're a smart guy because you can construct something amazing. And, it's always meant to be, well, the story is varied, it depends on people, and any intention is good. But the concept that you're mentioning there to do with challenging that is to say, well, the concept is there has to be an intention. That's the important thing. And that's what makes art. So if your intention is to disgust everybody, or to impress everybody, or to surprise everybody, tell us what you're trying to do, and then we'll judge it from that point of view. And the broad concept about this is that this is what art is about. It's kind of a game. The thing that I think coming from the vacuum of Africa, where there wasn't really much of an artistic tradition, was the idea of producing art for no audience and for no purpose. In other words, this is just experimental. It is, the European idea that I came across was, again, in the 70s when I first got to Europe. I was dismayed at the art world because you went everywhere and they said this is you should be producing something with purpose. You know, you're helping the poor, you are bringing people's attention to nuclear war, you're um, you know, talking about poverty. It's just wonderful stuff, but it didn't strike me as anything to do with art as I'd begun to understand it. This was full of intention. You know, the more intention you have, the better the art it should be, but not really. What I was thinking of was, well, what happens if you're an artist who doesn't know what you're doing? If you don't have any intention, you're just somebody rather who's trying to explore, what do I intend, what do I want to do, what is this all about? And you know, that sounds quite nice. You are met with, so you have the institution of the art world, you have the experiences of the people who follow art or who are interested in art. Everybody wants to get something out of it, and so if you're doing something just because you don't know what you're doing, you know, if you're a real artist in my eye, that you're just experimenting, trying to find out what is my intention. It strikes me that yes, you know, it is actually quite valuable for the rest of society. Everybody grows up and they say, oh, I want to be this, I want to do that. You know, you have all the cultural influences on you. You have a clear idea of what you'd like to do. I want to make beautiful things. I want to gain power. Or I want to destroy the world, or you know, whatever. Where did you get all these ideas from? Where did you get these urges from? Well, if you're an artist, you know, you grow up also with influences around you. So to a certain extent, all of this eventually feeds back. But if you're trying to say, well, why do I want beautiful things? I mean, maybe you don't want beautiful things. Do I want beautiful things? And if I do, why do I? And what's it all about? And you know, the process of being an artist as a psychological experiment is quite valid. But you know, eventually, you know, so it's a deep thing. I wanted to explore whether or not positive approach to life is a good thing. Maybe a negative approach to life is a better thing. So I play around with things. The only thing that there is to do with art is that to a certain extent it's institutionalized. You have society where you can say, oh, I wish to experiment with stuff. I'm just going to put a bomb in a railway station. You know, it's a great experiment, but it doesn't really meet kind of social approval, because what about those people who are damaged by that? To a certain extent, we do have a degree of politeness, which is to say, I'm going to experiment with evils, for example, but I'll try and do it in a way, in a space where I'm allowed to do it and where I can be seen to be doing it, a thing experimentally without harming other people. And so you have, in a broad sense, you have an artistic institutions which are built up, which I just meant to give you a free, safe play space to try things out. Well, if it's a question of every kind of play is valid, but you know, then the question is, what's the use of it? What's it all for? Or let's give awards for the people who have the more valid experiments, which is fine. It's actually, you know, it's a game which people who follow art can and should do, but it is not necessarily related to what the artists did. I mean, it's very nice to look at art and to try and understand what kind of torture or experiment an individual did and try and tune into that as opposed to your own ideas of things. But it's also perfectly valid to use all the work that you see out there for your own purposes as an audience and, as a social experiment. So basically everybody's picking at everything from a different direction. And partially this sculpture thing, which I should have put on the slideshow here, that there are different directions, different points of view, which are available to any thought. Anything can be seen from a variety of completely different points of view. And the idea, I suppose, of that sculpture is that it's rather hard to see more than one point of view at one time. If you're trying to think in 5 dimensions, we think in a linear fashion. We think about this and what the consequence of this and this and this, and we go along a little tunnel. We want to see it from completely different points of view. It's just too much for our brain to follow these different paths. So this is a reminder that everything that there is, ultimately I call this thing an epiphany, but the point of any kind of understanding is a multidimensional thing. It is a moment. Well, I'm going to criticize also the fact that any piece of enlightenment is also a limited little thing, but it's as you go. It's a little explosion, pop, a moment a moment of realization. It basically kills the thing that you've realized by the time you realize it. A bit like quantum. By the time you've seen it, you've destroyed it. But right. Anyway, that's another subject.
So this sculpture, so my next question really kind of leads into the photography, and particularly some of the stuff, the material that you brought in today with call it the old school camera, basically. Mm-hmm. But I think when I see the sculptor and see some of the things that that you've taken pictures of, and just listening to you when you say a thought in a thought, it's like I think of that photo of the Homo sapiens, which is basically the lineage of human beings from the, I think, Homo erectus. I don't remember the order actually, but it starts with a monkey-looking thing, and then it ends up with us, the humans. And I just remember my last class that I took in middle school was we're talking about what AI is going to do to the human beings, right? Where we started off as, like these 4-legged beings, and then now we're standing up, and then we're going back to the cell phones and AI, and then we're going to be looking down, and we're going to go back to the same point. So that, to me, that's the thought within the thought, but it's like we're going to just end up in the same place where we started from. But this would be my last question. So in relation to that, how can your art be used as a tool to educate people about cultural heritage and technological evolution? Because I don't know if anybody else has taken time to actually look at his works, but there's a lot of some of the images. Obviously, you use some very interesting computerization, or So how do you inform or educate us who don't, we're not familiar with all this stuff? In light with everything that's going on, like with AI and...
Well, I think it's always a question of a discussion. There isn't really any answer. The idea of educating anybody to anything is really... it's not the object of the exercise. So, in other words, there are lots of things you can do along the way. And as I was trying to say, the whole point about being an artist really is not knowing, not understanding. You're exploring all the things that you don't know about. So how can you give conclusions? How can you educate anybody? What you can do is stand by, because life isn't just one little moment. You can stand back afterwards and you can say, oh, along the way, while I was doing that, this was interesting, that was interesting. And, you know, as human beings, one of the biggest things about the activity of art and the intention, that's the good side of things, is that there's a story, there's a journey behind it. And so, for example, a very simple thing to do with intention. You go to a gallery, you look at the pictures and you take them seriously. You go out of the door and you don't look at the sidewalk, you don't look at the patterns on the sidewalk, you don't look at the patterns on the wall, you don't look at everything in the same kind of a way. Why not? I mean, there's more wonderful stuff on the sidewalk than there is on a Jackson Pollock painting. You know, you beam into the thing that he did. And the reason that you look at his stuff is because you think, well, somebody intended something. Somebody, he spent his whole life, he spent lots of money on paint. Just imagine, he had to go out there and get somebody to, you know, how much did it cost him to get a 20-foot canvas? Where did he store it? How much mess did it make? How much sacrifice did he have to make in order to make that damn thing? And then you simply presume, well, if he went to all that trouble, there must have been something there. But if there's a pattern on the sidewalk outside, it's just luck. I mean, what's it got to do with me? Well, you know, what Jackson Pollock also may not have that much to do with you, but so you you think that there's it's an excuse to concentrate on something. Actually, I mean, here's a nice example. I have one of my friends played with a lot of prominent musicians, and he's going deaf from too much amplification. And I keep telling him, oh, I'm listening to all this music, beautifully mixed, fantastic, you know, super studio quality, resolution. And he's saying, if you make the music, you can't hear all of that. You're trying to suck something out of this high fidelity, beautifully mixed thing. What you're hearing is, you know, the expertise of the mixing desk and the guy who did it, and the acoustics of the room and the equipment and all the rest of that. That's nothing to do with being a performer. You know, that's not what we put into it. I could hardly hear anything anymore because I'm half deaf. I'm out there playing, I can't really hear it, I can't hear the mix, I can't hear the rest of the band. And, you know, what are you doing wasting your time on being a hi-fi freak? Well, I'm thinking, well, the thing that always struck me is one little story about the Vietnam War, where you had the North Vietnamese who were living wild. And there are all these stories about them becoming very attuned to nature. And I read one thing which said these guys could smell toothpaste in the big river because there were GIs 5 miles upstream brushing their teeth. Well, if you have that super animal sensitivity, you're really living in the moment. You're living an enhanced moment that you're living in. And the same thing is happening when you're performing the music. You're lucky enough because you're right inside the piece of music. The person who's listening to the hi-fi, what they're trying to do is recreate the awakeness, the sense of being present that the musicians had. So they use the excuse, they're interested in the sound of the drums and nice mix and so on and so forth. Whatever it is that gets you aware, you know, you could say go out and walk around on the beach. That'll wake you up. You know, nothing wrong with that. You know, study the history of this piece of art. This is going to increase your awareness and your sense of being involved. And without feeling involved, your senses are dull. And without pretending to yourself that there's meaning in every stroke of paint, you know, maybe there isn't any meaning in every stroke of paint, but if you can think there is, then you wake yourself up. So it's a parallel kind of a process. And, you know, the assumption of intention is important. You know, this is the AI. Did the computer intend to do something? You've got all these big social scientists who are saying that, oh, it's nice to see an average of the intention of millions of people. You know, it's nice. Well, there's also another side to things there, which is, yeah, it's just a new kind of fashion of the extinction of intention. You know, science is neutral. It's not somebody's opinion. It's just the fact about, you know, this chemical and that chemical does something together. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to take other human beings into account? We just had the truth. And then, you know, if we have art which is pure, it's not spoiled by some other human being intending something on it. You can have this fantasy that you can turn you on as well. But yeah, the question of AI art is, well, that's another point. Nowadays, what we've done as a society, you know, the thing about art is an individualistic thing. This is the feeling of one person who painted this picture. That if it was a committee decision, we wouldn't credit it with so much intention. We would just say, oh, it's a bad compromise, just like government, and it's anonymous, and well, the other side to thing is, if you wish to, you can start saying, I am part of this incredible technological society. You know, first of all, one little individual over there, he just gets crushed. A truck runs over him and nothing, it makes no difference. But between all of us, we have developed science and we manufacture microchips and we've been to the moon and we do all of this in mass as a crowd. And the individual doesn't matter, but what we do as a technological society, this is the incredible thing. Well, then you can take pride in being, I'm a member of this tribe who have invented this technology, and I'm more pleased with the fact that a computer can create a picture. It's much more exciting to me, it has more meaning to me, or at least I tell myself, than any individual person, because it's a manifestation of our power as a communal species. Yeah, I think that has an attraction to it.
So does
But
that
the
make
returning,
does that make you fear that part of your work is going to be taken away by this new technology?
no, it doesn't make me feel that. But this is like to do with that sculpture. This is one of those things where you return to where you started from, because at the end of the day, who cares what this Piwai? You know, at the end of the day, if you know, I'm saying that art doesn't really have any purpose. It's not an experimental thing to solve some social problem, but in many ways it does inadvertently, because, you know, okay, I mean, I wrote a bad science fiction book many years ago, where seemingly you had. Well, it wasn't called artificial intelligence and it wasn't called nanorobots, but all of this was in the story where anything that you wanted could be manifest. And you just want a house, you want an island, you want a new planet. You just give instructions and these things go out and make it for you. Well, at that particular point, the question is, what do you want? Oh, it's obvious what I want. Well, it's not obvious what you want. It's what you were brought up to think that you want. You know, you're part of a tradition of people, I want to have fun. Why do you want to have fun? You know, because fun is fun. well, maybe fun isn't fun. Have you thought about it? Well, I don't know, but it's just, at the end of the day, we don't know what the hell we want. And the more power you give us, the idea of somebody somewhere has been playing around with what is it that I want? What is the fundamentals of what is need? Asking the questions, is kindness good? There are lots of things which are happening nowadays. A lot of people are taken for granted. No, kindness isn't good. Punishment is good. Make people suffer. This is how this is it's a philosophy that was around before Buddha, that if you really want to understand enlightenment and so on, you must go and burn your hands in the fire and you must suffer and starve yourself. The big message of Buddha was, no, you don't. Goodness, you can experience goodness and achieve enlightenment. But who's going to be doing that kind of thinking? And in what space are they going to be doing it? Are they... if society leaves a little bit of space for people to experiment with that, they have a slight chance of actually getting some of the benefits of their experimentation. Yeah.
Well, that was my last question, so I'm going to leave the stage and then I'll let you go on and talk about everything else you want to talk about. And I think the audience, you guys have free to also to ask questions. And yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Philip.
Oh, thank you.
So you went to Gokwe, Philip. It was a remote place, right? You wanted something, that had not been done before at that point. I was just wondering why you chose Gokwe. Because I believe Zimbabwe at that point did a lot of remote places, whether in the east, west, south, north. Why did you choose Gokwe?
Well, that was partially kudos. I mean, that's one of those things really, again, just blending in some of my thoughts about intention. A lot of your intention as an artist is a mixed thing, and it's not always something special. You want to go somewhere where just because you can tell your friends you've been you've been to Gokwe because they've never been there. Yeah, it was partially just curiosity at the time. I went on 2 trips. I went to two out-of-the-way places. I must say, it's not really, I'm not an adventurer. We went to Fort Thule as well, which not many people have been to. One of the big things to do with adventure in general is you try and make yourself more aware of stuff. I mean, the more intensely you experience life, the more potential pleasure or potential value you get out of it. So if you go to somewhere where you've been before, chances are you're going to say, there's nothing to look at here, I've been there before. If you go to somewhere else which promises something new, and there's a lot of people are interested in danger, so they're going to go somewhere or other where you have to be awake every minute. You might be eaten by a lion. The trip to Gokwe was, I suppose once if you become part of a tradition, it's a little bit of a cultural thing. And I've noticed one thing in Zimbabwe, at least amongst the whites, the colonial whites, was that there was a lemming-like desire to go and have adventures. It has become a competitive thing. Those adventurers who went out and crossed China by foot, who tried to sail across the ocean, was largely a feeling that every moment matters because, I'm trying to achieve fame, trying to achieve something. But I think a lot of the time, really, it's really trying to find some reason to be awake. If you think that every step that you've been, you have to take notice of it. I mean, it's also part of the whole idea of photography, the whole idea of art is, I think there are people like Sapolsky talking a lot about how human beings have taken primitive parts of the brain which were designed for other purposes and reapplied them to culture. And he's talking a lot of the time about, I think it's the singular cortex, which is designed for gustatory disgust, it's the phrase he uses. It's designed to stop you eating poisoned food, and that is, in a modern human being, is used to process moral disgust. And so you have an excuse to make yourself feel awake. I think when it comes down to an awful lot of things, we're quite primitive creatures. We wake up and we're a little bit irritated, so let's start a world war. It's just because I felt a little bit uncomfortable this morning, and that's, it's just something has to happen, let's just do it. But it can be a positive side of things, saying that, how am I going to feel? I woke up feeling a bit groggy today. I'm not really awake. How do I feel a bit more awake? How do I get more value out of my hours? So let's find some excuse, and let's go on an adventure.
So just a bit of a follow-up on that. So of the Gokwe photos, which ones did you find outstanding or interesting? Photos of...
There's a degree of continuity that anything is a build-up from where you started out. So if you've been in a group of people, you're talking about people, then clearly to transition to people is a more interesting thing than landscapes. If you're sick of something, you want to make a change. There are a lot of very interesting things about photography because it is not really, it's meant to be a neutral recording medium. A lot of people have spoken about, the thing is that it doesn't tell the truth. You don't see everything that's around it. You don't smell the place. You just look at a frame around something, and a lot is left up to imagination. And a lot of the attraction of it is mystery. An awful lot in terms of photos is stuff that is not in there. Exploratorium in San Francisco years ago, and they had a machine where you could stand somewhere and it followed your eyes and it gave a trail across a projected photo of where your eye had been. And your eyes moved really fast and they went all over the place very quickly. And at that moment I had this realization that if you have a photo of something or other which explains something, most of us are functional in life. What's it about? Oh, it's about blah, blah, blah. If you've seen it all, that's your full explanation. Why do you need to look at that photo anymore? Where's the mystery anymore? How many bolts to take off your crankshaft? 5 of them. That's it. You don't need the picture anymore. What happened when I looked at this picture was that I saw that my eye moved to a bunch of places and it moved in a circle. And then I suddenly realized what really makes a very interesting photo. If you have a photo which satisfies you completely, it's finished. if you have a photo that doesn't satisfy you, I mean, this is why this is really depressing in a way. You look at the picture and you say, oh, look at the guy's hat. Okay, I've looked at his hat, now I'm bored. Now I look at his shoes. That's interesting, that's interesting. Look at his dog. Nothing there is so interesting that it holds your attention forever. You look at it for a brief moment, it's interesting enough, and then you wander off to another part of it. And if there are enough points, 3 points or so in the picture, where by the time you've got to the third point, you're bored with looking at his dog, you're quite happy to go back and look at his hat again. In which case, you just say, oh, look at that hat, oh, look at his shoes, oh, look at the dog. And the picture where nothing is that interesting, you go round and round and round, you're going to say, that picture has magic. That picture has a real mystery to me. I can never get enough of it. It's got enough boringness to it that you never quite follow it and that you never quite grasp it and that you're always a little bit interested in it. And so, I mean, if you think of it from that point of view, it's pretty depressing to think that, the picture that's actually a semi-failure is the one that's going to be the great work of art because it intrigues us forever. Yeah, that's one of those things, whether the landscape interests you. It really, for me, it depends on the mood. I am fascinated by people. But, to a certain extent, it's just a completely different thing. There's all this illusion that you can understand people from a photo. Well, I say it's an illusion, it probably is. But, I mean, how much can you really read in a face? And say, oh, that person looks a very interesting person. Well, some of the time it's completely wrong. It doesn't really matter. I mean, by the time this is the whole point about the art, is you put something in an isolated situation. It's in a frame, on a wall, in a gallery. At that stage, it's your own little game. If it stimulates the idea, oh, this is very mysterious, doesn't matter whether it really reflected the reality that was that way. Well, just one example, Gokwe. No, it wasn't Gokwe, it was Thule, Fort Thule. So driving to Fort Thule, you start driving through miles and miles, you hardly see anything there. No stores, no settlements, nothing. It's mapani trees, big mapani trees, and you drive a few hundred miles and they get shorter and shorter and shorter. And eventually when you get to Fort Thule, they're now just bushes because it's the Kalahari. So it's fascinating, it's hypnotic. You're driving these beautiful trees, endless trees. You have this feeling of incredible space. And you say, I must take a photo of that. You stop the car. What do you see? 4 trees. And behind them just some massive trees. Does that give you a feeling that you've been through 100 miles of all of this? It doesn't. So you take the picture and it just looks like a couple of trees. It doesn't reflect what you're trying to photograph. But once in a while, you could go to the botanical gardens in Harare and take a picture of 3 trees in front of each other, which somehow or other gives you a feeling, oh my God, this is endless miles and miles of this stuff. It's completely false, but in terms of what the picture has done for you, that one worked, whereas the real one failed completely. Yeah, there's, take 20 pictures, take a series of, whether you shoot a movie, you can be like Andy Warhol, or you photograph, he pointed the camera at the Empire State, the movie camera, and turned it on and left it for 8 hours running, and then switched it off. You can do the same thing in your car, just long hypnotic journey. Yeah, it's a question really of, are you trying to reproduce what you saw there at the time? Are you trying to reproduce the fantasy about what it was? Yeah, I mean, that's anyway, that's probably the end of that.
Okay, thank you.
So for me, you mentioned Rob Sapolsky. One of the books is "Oh Behave," that has to do with the whole thing about just what are our primordial sort of instincts with things. And I think one thing that I think drives in photography is about order and disorder. Pleasure or disgust. That when you see something, you're like, why? You want it to look a certain way, but it doesn't, and then you want to capture that, and maybe to show other people, like, it was like this. So, if you're seeing a person wearing clothes, right, it could be that they're just mismatched. Something is just off, and so it's not following the order that you expect.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what intrigues you. And if we go back to when we were a child, there are two things they're trying to do: disorder, which is disorganize things, and rebuild their new sort of order. So you give them any little things, they're always trying to either stack them and make something, or there's something that's nicely made and they just break it apart. So I think that's what probably drives a lot of photography. It's like there's something that's off. Either you're looking for symmetry or the lack of it. You're expecting something and it's not there, and that triggers you to say there's something there. And that's
Well, that's very similar to, I mean, one of the big inspirations, which I didn't mention, to do with that sculpture was from my parents, who they and their generation seemed to be impressed by Arthur Koestler and the book The Act of Creation. And in that, his big deal in that was to try and say a moment of enlightenment or realization or a joke, they're part of the same process, and that both of them, well, actually, I think somebody said, John Cleese said that a joke is the crossing of two uncomfortable truths. But in Koestler's thing, he talked about this moment of pleasure or the enlightenment or the eureka when what's his name went into the bath and it overflowed, and then he realized his mathematics and Euclid, one of those guys, to do with displacement. So
Euphrates principle.
Yeah. But whatever it is, he described each thought line as being a matrice, and he said that all of these things are crossing of two matrices. So in other words, you have one line of thought which should be separated from another one, but suddenly there's something between the two of them. In some ways, if you think in terms of joke, you've got ha, 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 ha. It's almost like you're bouncing between two separate different things. And the idea of this contrast of what your expectation and the symmetry that you're talking about, it's definitely expectation is a major part of all of this. That could be, you could say in terms of what do you call it, in the intention, that it's everything that's interesting in art is really a kind of a contrast between your anticipation and what you're being presented with. It's a kind of a challenge between all of these two things that are going to intersect. And if they do intersect and they have something to do with each other, that's valuable. That gives you the pleasure. I mean, there's definitely if you think in terms of cultural engineering, that's always related to culture that you've inherited, that you built up. There are a bunch of rules that you built up in life. Wicked people have big mustaches, which they stick out the side, waxed mustaches, something like that. This is an anticipation, and you have a play on that. Yeah, but if in terms of one of the with conceptions about that high culture and so on is culture referring to itself. In other words, here's my reference to Picasso's reference to Renoir's reference to something else. You're talking about. I was talking about the thought behind the thought. All of this sort of stuff doesn't really build up too much conclusion, because it eventually is not connected to the original experience. It's so-and-so's theory of so-and-so's theory of so-and-so's theory of so-and-so's theory. The chances are by now it's now a very abstract thing that you're dealing with. But it feels very important, because you're making reference to years of cultural history and so on, and that feels like high art. It's sophisticated. It's if you're thinking in terms of cultural exclusion, keeping the ignorant people out of your class. Only the highfalutin people are going to hang out with you. Then you'll invent something that's sophisticated and complicated. Yeah.
It seems like some of the subjects are people, places, events that you want to go to, and others maybe it just intrigue you and you're able to get them. I guess, are there things that you like, people, places, events, cultural things that you haven't shot that you're interested in shooting, and maybe what's kept you from shooting it to this point?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a strange part of things. I'm not entirely sure. So the great picture of the interesting stuff is probably a bit like one of those things where you've seen it. It's been celebrated, okay, then it's yesterday's story. And the intriguing thing, which is of not really that much consequence, is... so what I used to... this was partially because I was involved in Europe, where there weren't that many places that hadn't been visited. There weren't many things that hadn't been done in terms of photography. So I always used to tell myself, I'm interested in making a boring picture of a boring subject, which I don't know why, but somehow intrigues me. And that to me was the biggest personal achievement. Now, partially because what kind of magic does it take for you to be able to... where are you going to... What is this magic ingredient that you're going to get? How are you going to get it? It's easy to go to a famous place, you go to the pyramids. You can't go wrong. The pyramids are interesting. But this is partially, hey, somebody give me a gold star. That was the ambition. Or how can I congratulate myself on having skills? Because I don't know how I managed to do it, but this picture just somehow works for me. And but what I said in the title to this thing about, which I haven't really dwelled on, the idea of the artist being a midwife as opposed to being a creator. I think that comes down to an awful lot of the conception about... maybe this is a bigger subject. The whole idea of intention has become a very convenient thing in culture. Again, that's quote Sapolsky there to do with free will. But I think you've got a lot of scenarios where the question of blame or the question of what do you call it? Giving status to people is most of the time it's a manipulative convenience. You know, if you take somebody other who's a troubled youth who's going around and damaging cars and smashing shop windows. Well, you know, you can take the approach which is to say that this poor person has problems. We have to put them through a lot of therapy and find out what's wrong. And lots of people are going to say, that's too expensive. I've got enough problems in life. I'm not going to spend all the effort that is required to repair this person. How can I just simply dispose of this person without, you know, somebody will say he didn't, you know, he was born into a troubled culture, a troubled family, with Sapolsky's research, or research that he quotes, you know, the person with a violent background, their brain doesn't develop properly. Mm-hmm. You know, all of this stuff has to be dealt with. But people just, if you don't want to deal with it, what's the convenient way of doing it? You say, he intended to do it. He meant to smash that window. And as soon as you've said that, then you can say, just lock the door, you know, just get rid of him, dispose of him. Let's not waste any money on trying to fix that guy. At the same time, if you happen to have been lucky in life and you suddenly have loads of money because the right circumstances have arrived on your doorstep, you don't want people to say, oh, well, you know, you ended up lucky, I didn't end up lucky. You know, why don't you give me some of your money? No, I don't want to give you my money. I want it. So what am I going to say? I earned it myself. You know, I don't owe you anything. You didn't work as hard as me. So you suddenly want to give yourself a label of you know, congratulate yourself. So the idea of that creeps into art plenty. You know, this guy's a genius. Well, you know, give him the best place and the best seat in the restaurant. He's a genius. Give him all the advantages. Open the doors for him because he's a genius. Well, you know, there's this intention of, you know, you want to be seen as a genius, as an artist. You want to convince yourself you're a genius as an artist so that you can get advantage. At the same time, there are lots of things in society who want to say, oh, I'm, you know, my artist, you know, the artist who I follow or the musician, they're a genius. Well, to a lot of the time, it's really it's a substitute. If they are a genius and they should be given the best place in the tour, then maybe there's some case for me to be given some advantages as well, because you know, I'm pretending that I'm not just selfish. I'm pretending that I'm a generous guy, and I grant this person all these wonderful characteristics. You know, they are a genius. Aren't I a generous person? So, you know, give it to me when I get the chance.
How much of your father's work had an influence on you, if any? I know that he passed away sort of when you were young, but did he have any influence on what you do today as far as your work and how you take your pictures?
Yeah. So he, I never thought of him as a photographer. So he had plenty of influence on me. I mean, he died when I was 13. He had plenty of influence on me as an artist. A lot of influence in terms of shapes and colors and all that stuff. But in terms of photography, I never thought of him as any good as a photographer until recently. What I'd seen of his work was that he had taken a number of big trips, a year and a half trip through Asia. I grew up with slideshows of all of this, and I had the impression that, yeah, it was exciting stuff. I mean, that this was really expedition work, but not really photographically artistic. I had the impression that basically he didn't care that much. He cared about his painting, but these were snapshots, holiday pictures. But I changed my mind a little bit, but especially more because then I found recently a whole lot of negatives from around 1938 to, it went up to about 1953 or so, black and white pictures. Those were pictures done with not as big a camera as this, but a handheld camera, but with quite big film. And those were pretty clumsy cameras, but you didn't have like a modern camera. We had zoom lenses. So the shape and the style of that camera plus the fact that they were big enough that you could get a little bit more detail on them, meant, I think the biggest thing was that he photographed people with some space around them. So, if it was a portrait, you could see the mountains in the distance and the huts and the road. And this suddenly struck me as being, he was doing what I aspired to. He was doing that prior to me anyway. That was an unconscious kind of a thing that he'd already been doing. Then later on, just recently, I've processed a large number of the color pictures from the rest of the trip, and I think I've developed more of an appreciation of some of them. Remember the big thing in photography was, in the days of these slow cameras, you couldn't capture the moment. And when it came to Cartier-Bresson, the French photographer, capturing the moment with small cameras, suddenly it became a thing that instead of just capturing the fine detail and all the texture of a big scene, was now you're going to capture something that you couldn't quite see with your eye, which was just a moment of something that's special. I mean, why would you capture something that's not special unless you're kind of perverse? But it's always got to be something along those lines. So if you can capture things that people didn't see because they never went there, you can capture things because they're not important enough to have been somewhere where they could have seen this. They couldn't afford to have the best seats where they could see what you see. They weren't privileged enough to be admitted into the football stadium where nobody else is allowed to go. And then you can capture things which are moments that are too small to have noticed. Either the fleeting moment, which is where it happened too fast for you to see. The human eye and the brain is not good enough to actually process a crowd of people doing something. You are somebody other with this special magic. You come to a crowd of people and you just choose that one moment where 6 people are all looking interesting. What kind of mental feat is that? Or the other thing is things which are just too ordinary. They slip your attention. You walk down the street and you didn't look at your shoes. You didn't look at something or other which is too ordinary. Nobody sees it. It's so rare because it evades everybody. So that's part of many of these things have been represented in photography. I mean, for example, banal photography is one of the things that somewhat interests me. This has been almost like, you could say, the school of banality, stuff which is so boring, you would never look at it. And then somebody or other came along and, it's the back end of the wall of a factory building, or just the angle on the shot, which is not quite, there's nothing there. But nobody would think of taking a photo of that. But you did. You're special. Yeah.
Well, how has the cameras over time changed the concept of photography?
Well, there's a fantastic British series which is The Genius of Photography, which is actually still available on parts of the internet where you can watch it, a 6-part series. And really what that in effect says, the genius of photography was the technology. And there's an awful lot of truth in that. It starts out by saying what did the technology permit photographers to do? And photographers changed over time. It's almost kind of saying like, well, when we invented this new lens or this new kind of camera or new process, then that's the genius. No, not the damn photographer, not the eye of the photographer. I mean, they take it for granted and they try to be polite, but that's definitely the point of that, and it definitely goes right through the photography, explaining in a massive amount of detail what happened. It's I don't know how many years ago it was, but it's not really the evolution of what's happening nowadays with cell phones. That wasn't part of it at that time. There's definitely a big discussion about what happens with everybody being a photographer nowadays. There's a big discussion about photographers are redundant. There's no such thing as there's no interest in photography. Well, there's much more. Well, I've heard people, one of the big discussions here in the SFO, not SFO, SF MoMA, a discussion about 10 years ago, and they said photography is doing very well. What's not doing very well are the curators and the museums. Because everybody's happily taking photos. Nobody's got any problem with photography. Everybody's still enthusiastic about photography. The problem that they've got is all the wise guys at the museums can't work out which bits are special, or which bits are more special, or which bits deserve attention. And it's very much to do with the what do you call it? The intention side of things. Why? And the same thing applies to all kinds of art. Why should anybody bother to look at anything? Why? Who are you to present something that somebody else should look at? You're making a claim to yourself. You're making a claim to other people. Are they wanting to make, elevate you to make for whatever purpose they want? And when it comes to photography, it's not the easy thing to do is to say, oh, there's a shortage. 100, 200 years ago, not many people could draw a realistic rendition of a human body. So if you had that skill, you were a rarity, and people would say, oh, you must be good because he's got skills that we haven't got. And what do you do when you have an oversupply, as you do nowadays with photography? It becomes, where's the immediate search is, where's the intention? What did somebody mean? What was an accident? What was just, nothing special? And it's a struggle. The one thing that does exist, though, the one thing that I would say about photography is that it's always really to judge the intention behind it, you need to see quite a lot of photos by an artist. You can have this genius photo which could be taken by a robot. It might be the one in a million photo. It's just perfect. Composition's perfect. You can praise it all that you like. But if you really want to see what somebody's done, you need to look at more pictures, because you don't know what is coincidence. You don't know what is chance. However, if you see, well, most of the time this is the thing which is in the photographic art field. Yeah, this is another fairly interesting thing. Is a lot of photographers feel the need to show their intention. They feel the need to do the same thing again and again and again and again. You know, I photograph people out walking their dogs. So I'm spend my whole life, I'm going to be the guy in the world who photographs people walking their dogs. And, so this is trying to make you be noticed and trying to make it, oh, there's a picture of somebody walking a dog, that must be that guy. And there's it's again to do with Sapolsky, not that he quotes necessarily the collecting instinct, but I'm sure he could find some part of the brain that's involved in our very primitive desire to collect stuff. And then our collection mania goes crazy. And you have hoarders and clutterers. Some guy who collects old shopping bags from stores ends up with a house with 400,000 different shopping bags, the world's greatest collection of shopping bags. It's almost like this is what's kind of encouraged in the art world. This is mental illness. Somebody or other who's too obsessive about something or other. But it's almost expected in the art world. Oh, he doesn't have a consistent style. In other words, he doesn't just do the same thing again and again and again and again and again. It's almost like we want our pound of flesh of intention out of you. So we want you to become a little bit mentally ill and to do the same thing again and again. So we can just say, oh, that's the guy who does the blue circles on the red background. Somebody else who does a green one on a red background.
You kind of segued into, because you mentioned color. I always felt like taking shots in black and white had more of a humanistic feeling as opposed to color. To me, I saw more in the black and white photos than I would see in color photos. What's your take on it?
Well, as far as I know, I don't know, this is my amateur understanding of biology and science. Well, first of all, in your eyes, you have rods and cones. So the cones are the ones that see the color. The cones are not very sharp because they're big cells in the middle of your vision, and they don't really. I think the science of vision really has an awful lot to do with things. First of all, you don't see color as sharply as you do black and white. Your rods are deeply packed and they cover more of your eye. Your vision at night, the cones don't respond in low light conditions. So when you go out at night, you think there's no color, but you're seeing in black and white. It's only because the rods are the only things that are sensitive enough to get the picture. So that's the first thing, is that you have two different parts of your brain processing two different things. Now, clearly, then I think they're different different parts of your eye dealing with different things, but I think they're different parts of your brain that deal with all kinds of, they're identifiable parts of your brain dealing with different things. Movement, texture, outlines. A lot of the science nowadays of trying to use computer vision is trying to copy things that you might think is, you have there's little stick figures just with a couple of lines moving around in a little animation. And your brain easily can see, oh, that's an enthusiastic walk, this is doing a dance. Very, very little information. That's one part of your brain working on it. As I understand it, that in black and white, you see your brain concentrates more on texture and detail. That also that when you give somebody a choice of seeing thing in color or in black and white, that mostly my impression is that the color takes more precedent. So you don't look at the texture as much when you see how colorful it is. Whereas if you do it in black and white, you don't have that interference anymore. So that's absolutely, in terms of photography, in terms of doing black and white, you are really self-consciously concentrating on different things. And that's the point with this big camera, which was, in its day, it was the only way of capturing incredible fine detail. So if you had a field with thousands of blades of grass, you couldn't do that with a small camera. It would just be a blur. But if you really wanted to beam in on that and you said, here's the pleasure, here's my photo, just look at the incredible amount of detail on it. If you did that in color, people would just say, oh, it's a green field. You did it in black and white, they'd just say, oh my, that's detailed. And then, obviously things to do with movement and outlines. One of my friends took took a lot of photos on the beach in Rio, blurred, out of focus. Just human bodies, throwing balls, dancing, walking, body shapes. You just beam into one particular aspect of what you're seeing and take an interest in that. If you did it in color, you'd just say, oh, it's out of focus color pictures, what? But it's strong, yeah.
But I would think you asked a question about technology. I think the technology of capturing and representing that image has gotten better than with color. And I think that's why initially people were more interested in black and white, because it simplified things. Everything else was so poorly captured. They was like, okay, it's junk. This is what remains. But now I think even in television, you're starting to see that there is much more clarity. That if you see a video that was shot 10 years ago and then something that's shot now, it just strikes you at just the clarity of it.
Yeah, a lot of that. If you watch movies. Well, first of all, just to say that the difference of black and white and color is that, there are fewer things to concentrate on. So you can really make a point, or you can, become, beam in on something rather than the picture and not be disturbed by color and, other discussions and other thoughts. But in terms of movies and technology, that's a very big difference. To do with digital and movies. You have a process called reciprocity failure on film. So just on a technical level, you have little grains of silver halide, and if they collect light energy, photons go in there and they're stored like a battery. And each one of these crystals has to build up a large amount of energy before it can be developed. So a lot of photons have to hit it. I don't know in real terms, but maybe, thousands or millions or whatever it is, to build up enough charge that it develops. And until it develops, until it's received that amount of stuff and then you put it into the developer, nothing's going to happen to it. So it's almost like this little crystal only comes awake at a certain energy level. Well, when you see movies, night shots in particular, you go and, I mean, it's used creatively, but if you look at French Connection, which is a fantastic piece of film work, there are a lot of pictures where there's just blackness. You know, it's a dark, dingy thing, and you can just see a few lights, and it's very dramatic, but you don't see any detail in the shadows. And that's because film, below that certain level, it wouldn't respond. So you just had blackness, and then suddenly you started having a few details out of the blackness. Nowadays, digital photography is much more linear. In other words, that a very low light level is still going to make a difference. So you see all these night shots, and you can see all the details. I mean, it's like you see it with your. It's even better than your bare eyes sometimes. You stand outside, and you've been outside for an hour, and your eyes are sensitive to the dark. You can see all kinds of little subtle details. And modern film is much more. It's very different.